News Radio 700 WLW.
And so, Jace, yesterday they had this press conference, the Sheriff's Department in New Mexico.
Yeah.
Talking about the Baldwin situation, obviously. And somehow or another, it appears as though there was a live round in what was supposed to be a prop gun on the movie set. That is insane.
Yes. And it's insane that it sounds like there wasn't like safety measures put in place, like they
weren't very stringent. Let's put it that way. But
I mean, like even again, like it's just all these things I think we're learning. Like, I mean, last week we had Jason Nathanson on, and it was like, hey, there's actually even real guns that you see being used in movies, and turns out in a lot of cases, there are.
And the thing is, I'm not a gun expert. I grew up around guns, and I know I've known the basics of gun handling since I was a little kid.
Right.
But it was a revolver, and it's easy to check a revolver when you just flip the cylinder out there, look at it. It's right there in front of you. There's only 6 holes, maybe 8 holes that are right there in front of you. I don't know how you can look at that and go, I wonder what that is. It's obviously a freaking bullet.
Yeah. Well, there's that factor, too. I think just probably basic gun safety. And again, I don't really know much about guns. I grew up, my dad's a big hunter, but I never was. But yeah, you're right. Is it a natural instinct if you're handling a real gun to actually check to see if there's actually bullets in it before you point it at anyone?
Well, let's get our expert, because I want to know about the liability and all of this, because, man, there's tons of stories going around, and what this could happen, that could happen, and what all the possibilities are.
Yeah.
Wanted to get a legal expert in these matters. Robert Crain is a personal injury attorney, great lawyer, nationally known. Rob, welcome to the program.
Good to be here, guys.
So, Rob, based on what you've seen as a personal injury guy, what are we looking at here, civilly and maybe criminally?
Well, actually, let's start with the criminal side. I think they're looking very hard at the charge of involuntary manslaughter, which has a recklessness standard to it. It's not unprecedented to have somebody charged with that kind of a crime on a movie set that goes bad, and it happened in 2014 on the set of Midnight Rider. I don't think they're going to be looking at Alec Baldwin on that charge, because it appears that he followed the protocols that were in place and set somewhat by the industry. I do think David Halls, the first assistant director who was in charge of safety, who handed the gun, who called it a cold gun, and has now admitted that he didn't look at all the rounds prior to doing so. I'm thinking they're looking pretty hard at him at the moment. There's also the armorer. You have an armorer on every set where there are guns. Unfortunately, on this set, it was a relatively inexperienced, a very inexperienced, I'll go so far as saying 24-year-old armorer who, based on what's been reported, not yet comfortable in her role. So
what's an armorer?
Criminally,
That's an armorer is a person who handles any weapons on the set.
Okay, gotcha.
More or less. Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, criminally, they're looking at it. The first district attorney out there is gone on television and said we're going to take this slow and methodically, and we're looking at it. And I think that'll be a real possibility of those kinds of manslaughter charges. Going over to the civil side of things, goodness gracious, based on everything I'm reading here, this is not going to be just a negligence case. I've got a case I'm going to trial in New Mexico in February on a negligence case with gross negligence charges. New Mexico has fairly plaintiff-friendly gross negligence charges, at least compared to my home state of Texas, and it doesn't take as much liability-wise to get you to gross negligence, which then gets into punishment damages, which gets into the assessment of how much are you worth, so we can punish you with that amount so that you don't do this again. And now we're talking Alec Baldwin because he's one of the producers of this show, and so he's civilly going to be in the crosshairs, pardon the expression, on this particular matter, and anybody else that's involved in this set is going to be in that case. It's going to be a massive civil case.
Because I was reading, there are several. I mean, Baldwin was just one of the producers. I think I want to say I read 6, 7 different people are involved in producing this movie. So, in other words, all those people are civilly liable, perhaps.
Perhaps. But yes, there, as in many movies like this, and especially involving somebody like Baldwin, there's going to be multiple entities and individuals involved. But what you're looking at here, and you guys were just discussing it. What I'm reading is to the standard Hollywood protocols, movie set protocols. Goodness gracious, the things that you all were talking about, like myself growing up with my dad teaching me gun safety, they're not following, basic 101 gun safety out there.
Right.
And there's got to be a complete look at these protocols and across the whole television movie spectrum. And I know that one show, I believe an ABC show over the weekend, said, all right, we're suspending the use of guns until these protocols are revisited. But that has to be done because clearly having 500 rounds, they said they found 500 rounds on this set and a mix of dummies and blanks and live rounds. And rounds apparently were laying out outside the gun safe while they were all breaking for lunch, and nobody was really keeping an eye on the rounds, and gun practice shooting was taking place, and just a very undisciplined setting.
Yeah, that was Rob. That was one of the kind of the questions. I don't know if I think maybe you answered is that there's no uniform organization. There's no union or anything in which has any kind of regulation in place kind of across the board of the industry, right?
Apparently, and Rob, I'm sure you heard this, that a lot of the union, there were some union set members who walked because they were concerned about safety. I'm sure you heard that.
Yeah, there was apparently a half dozen cameramen and their assistants who had walked off earlier that day. They are now stating that part of the reason why was because of gun safety. Wow. The production company has kicked back on that, saying that they had received no complaints about gun safety, but that'll certainly be part of the investigation. When it comes to unions, I'm not well versed on what contracts, what kind of union rules and requirements are on those sets, but you can bet they're going to be part of any kind of union agreements going forward.
Yeah, you just think there would be, especially there are real guns being used in these movies, like that there would be some kind of governing body or some kind of guidelines that organization or group had set in which, hey, you know what, Rust. Here's what Rust has to follow. Point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That should be
These are the
boilerplate stuff.
Right, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like that it really exists.
Well, I mean, this is a Colt revolver. This is a real gun. And just, to kind of give some historical context here that kind of comes home on the Rust sets, Bruce Lee, the actor that, we all know about from way back when, his son Brandon Lee was killed the almost exact same way on the set of the movie The Crow back in 1993. Well, there was a sequel to The Crow in 2000 called The Crow Salvation. The first assistant director on that sequel, Dave Halls, the same first assistant director at the center of all of this. So that and when he was on set of the sequel in 2000, that there had been lots of talk about what had happened, or at least you would think. I'm now speculating here, but he was fully aware, I would think, of that history. And then he was involved in 2019 on a set where a gun went off when it shouldn't have, injuring an individual, and he got fired from that set in 2019. So there are more red flags to this story than most. Put it that way.
Rob, let me ask you just if you can, your professional opinion, how long are we going to be hearing about this? This is going to go on for years and years, don't you think?
It depends, quite frankly, on the dynamics behind the scenes. Honestly, in my world, insurance companies are lurking behind most of these cases, and it depends on which insurance companies, if any, are going to potentially be on the hook under their policies. There'll be how many. I mean, the more defendants you have, the longer it takes because they all want to point fingers at each other and blame each other. So it all depends on the things we don't know about yet as to, what policies of insurance are out there, how many defendants, who's blaming who. It usually takes much longer for the defendants to kind of work out, all right, I'm going to pay this percentage, you're going to pay that percentage, than it does for the plaintiff to actually get their case together. This case will be put together by the media and by law enforcement very nicely for the plaintiff's lawyer, whoever that may be. But it's going to be what's happening behind the scenes we don't know about that will determine how long it takes.
Rob Crain, thanks so much for talking to us, man. Really appreciate it.
Good stuff, Rob. Thanks.
Anytime, guys.